How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about the Steam Deck. This is the weekly news roundup, and I have 4 topics to cover in today's video. First off, I did a little bit of an investigation to figure out whether or not tariffs are going to affect the Steam Deck. Then my friends over at Steam Deck Gaming figured out a way to easily transfer files wirelessly from your PC to your Steam Deck, and it has a Deity plugin that works really well. Third on the list, I know everyone's sick of hearing about Switch 2 news, but there is one really cool way that the Steam Deck beats the Switch 2. And then finally, my friend Ben, who works at indie.io, sent me a key for a game called Deity 2, and it is great on the Steam Deck. So I figured I'd give it a little bit of a shout out and talk about its gameplay at the end of the video. I just checked the numbers and we are making a dent on the amount of people who watch this channel who aren't subscribed. Last week it was at 70%. Now it is slowly dipping down into the 60s range. So thank you for that. If you're one of those 65 to 70% who have not subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and set your notifications to all. All right, let's talk about this tariff situation and how it could potentially affect the Steam Deck, but why I think we're actually in a pretty decent spot. So I'm sure you saw the news last week that because of all the tariffs that were enacted on other countries, like mainly Vietnam, where a lot of the stuff is manufactured, or China, where the stuff is manufactured, Nintendo was forced to pull the pre-order date in the United States for the Switch 2. They also, right when I'm recording this video, pulled the pre-orders for Canada, which is weird. I don't really understand why. Maybe the Switch 2 has to come through the United States before it goes to Canada, at which point it would be subject to a tariff, and that would increase the price on something that people already feel is way too expensive. So I was thinking about this from the Steam Deck perspective on whether or not this is going to affect the Steam Deck, and I looked, it looks like the Steam Deck is manufactured in China, so that means there would be a tariff, because right before I recorded this video, China did not back down. They did not call Trump and say, hey, we want to negotiate a deal. So Trump enacted like something like 100% tariff on China. So that would be bad for the Steam Deck. But the real benefit that the Steam Deck has is that it's 3 years old and it's not really selling at the level of something like the PS5 or the eventual Switch 2. It's selling healthily for what it is, but like it sold 4 million units compared to the 12 or so of the PlayStation Vita. So that's like some context for you. And because it's 3 years old, I just have to assume that Valve has a pretty damn big stockpile of the Steam Decks already here in the United States. Like even with the refurbished one I just bought, it shipped the night after I bought it and then it was here the next day. That wouldn't be possible unless they already had some of these Steam Decks laying around here in the United States. Also, same thing goes for the limited edition one I bought a little over a year ago at this point. That thing shipped incredibly quickly, so they're not putting these things up for sale until they already have a stockpile here in the United States. So even if a tariff is enacted that would affect the Steam Deck if they were shipping them over here, I feel like the supply is not going to be outstripped by the demand. I feel like they have a pretty healthy stockpile of Steam Decks just laying around here in the United States, ready to be sold the next time a Steam sale comes up, or if someone gets a little frisky and has a $400 burning a hole in their pocket and they're like, I want a new Steam Deck, or they have $650 to buy a Steam Deck OLED 1TB edition. And I feel like we're pretty safe from the perspective that there's probably a big enough stockpile to outlast the tariffs. Like the tariffs aren't supposed to last forever. The whole goal seems to be to kind of rebalance trade globally. I don't want to talk about it too deeply because I'm not a tariff expert like seemingly everyone on Twitter became overnight. I don't know next to nothing about tariffs, but from the weirdly extensive research I've been doing on this just because I'm interested in it, it seems like the goal is not to have these in place forever. And I don't think we'd ever get in a situation where video game consoles just can't be sold here in the United States. Like we are, for all intents and purposes, the main market for every console under the sun. I know China is like an emerging market and Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Valve all want to get into China, obviously, because there's a lot of people there who want to play video games. And if they can get around the Chinese government, having their video games up for sale there is good. Like they can sell hardware there to hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. I'm not really sure how many people live in China. I'm sure it's probably close to 1 billion though, because it's a huge landmass. But the United States, for all intents and purposes, is the one that matters to a lot of these companies. Like it helps them having their consoles for sale in other countries, but like the one that really drives everything is the United States. So if it got to the point where the price was going to exorbitantly increase to a level that no one would willingly pay for it, I mean, these companies are providing a lot of income to the countries they reside in. So they're going to go to their governments and say, hey, figure this out. Like figure out how we can sell our consoles in the United States without having to charge an insane amount for them, because tariffs suck and they hurt our bottom line. Valve is an American company at the end of the day, unlike Sony and Nintendo, which are Japanese companies, and it also helps Valve that semiconductors are exempt from from tariffs. I mean, obviously they want to get factories up and running here in the United States so they can manufacture chips here, but that hasn't happened yet. So tariffs are not affecting semiconductors from Taiwan. I'm sure that helps, but the fact that they're manufactured in China, that doesn't help. So like my personal risk assessment, again, with limited knowledge of all this, I am by no means an expert. I'm nowhere close to an expert, is that for now we should be safe. But if this continues on for too long, it could become a problem. But I feel like the Steam Deck stockpile is big enough just based on the fact that this thing is 3 years in, the sales are dipping. They're not selling like hotcakes like they did back in the day when they would go out of stock relentlessly very quickly over time. I think we're good for now. I know there's probably a ton of armchair economists who are going to go off in their perspective in the comments. I don't really give a honestly. I have a Steam Deck. I have 2 Steam Decks. I'm good for now. I'll worry about this when the Steam Deck 2 is $6,000 because of tariffs. That's when I'll start complaining about it. But right now, I don't think there's anything to complain about. The Steam Deck is holding strong at that $399 base level. Refurbished units are going into stock regularly. Like I've seen them go in stock multiple times over the past week. I was able to just log in and get one. So yeah, it's not worth getting worried about, but it's just something to pay attention to. But that brings me to the second news story here, which is there's a new file transfer system that Steam Deck Gaming discovered and did a great deep dive video on how to set it up. And I felt like I should give that a shout out because if you're someone who likes to emulate on the Steam Deck, there is a way to get save transferring with your emulated games. But one of the main ways to do it is to pay for EmuDeck's Patreon. I'm not trying to disincentivize you from paying for that Patreon because I'm about to subscribe to it to get those cloud saves. But if you don't have a lot of money to do so, there are ways around it. And this cool way kind of interacts with Deity Loader to make it extremely simple. The main app that's being used here is called SyncThing. There's a couple other apps you have to set up in between to get this all up and running, but essentially what it does is it dedicates a folder on your Steam Deck and your main Windows PC as the same folder, and you can set it up to transfer from one to the other or make sure they both stay up to date, and it'll work automatically if you use the Deity Loader plugin, which is awesome. The real use case for stuff like this is obviously emulation. Like if you have a lot of emulated games on your Steam Deck like I do, I'm playing Metroid Prime Trilogy right now and it is awesome. It runs with Prime Hack at 60 FPS and the dual stick controls are just making that game feel like new again. If I wanted that save to transfer over to my main PC, I could just set this up on my Steam Deck and have everything swap over without really having to do anything, and that's cool because it works like Steam Cloud. Speaking of Steam Cloud, there are some games that don't support it, like Tokyo Extreme Racer's new version that came out earlier this year. At launch, it didn't support Steam Cloud, so if you wanted to play on your Steam Deck, you were relegated to just playing on your Steam Deck unless you went through the manual labor of finding the save and transferring it over to your Windows PC, and you'd have to do that every single time. It eventually got Steam Cloud, but if it never did, like a lot of EA games never did, you could just use this service to make sure that the saves swap back and forth from your PC and your Steam Deck, which is cool. One way I'd really like to use it is transferring footage that I've recorded on my Steam Deck. The way I've been doing it is I have a really long USB-C cable and an SSD, and I plug that into the Steam Deck's USB-C port. When I don't want to do that, I upload the files to Google Drive, and for some reason Google Drive uploads from the Steam Deck are just incredibly slow. So even with 500 megabyte or gigabyte movie files that I've made by exporting them from my Steam Deck's recording app, they still take forever to upload. So being able to just beam them back and forth from my Steam Deck to my PC sounds pretty cool, and it will help with these videos for B-roll. But yeah, this is something people have been asking about for months now in my comments. So if you've been looking for a way to sync files between your PC and your Steam Deck Gaming has you covered. Check out their tutorial. Damn, it is hot in my basement. Gotta take the jacket off. Let's get into the third news story, which is one cool way that I think the Steam Deck easily beats the Switch 2. So if you watched Nintendo's Direct last week where they showed off all these games running on the Switch 2, it was pretty awesome. I'm kind of excited to pick one up. One of the games that was shown is Hades 2. And after the event ended, it was announced that Hades 2 has a console exclusivity window with the Switch 2. So like when the game finally comes out into 1.0, PS5 players, Xbox players are not going to be able to play it for an indeterminate amount of time. I would guess 6 months to a year, and that really sucks. But something I've noticed as someone who plays a lot on the PlayStation 5, the Steam Deck, the Nintendo Switch, and everything else is that the Steam Deck and Steam itself seem to be exempt from a lot of these third-party exclusivity deals. The latest one on PlayStation that I can remember would be Silent Hill 2 that launched simultaneously on PS5 and PC, and when Hades 2 comes out, it's going to launch on Nintendo Switch and Steam at the exact same time. So that's just one massive benefit that the Steam Deck gets by having access to Steam as its main storefront, because with a lot of these third-party games that get console exclusivity deals, people don't have to worry about that because they can just buy the games on Steam and download them. But another cool level of this is that if it runs on the Switch 2, you can theoretically bet your ass that it'll run on the Steam Deck. I don't really want to get into the hardware specs and like, oh, this one has a like one more teraflop than the Steam Deck. Oh, it's so much better. I don't really care. The actual specs aren't out. It looked like from the footage I saw that games like Elden Ring were running about exactly the same on the Switch 2 that they run on the Steam Deck. Same goes for Cyberpunk 2077 and Hogwarts Legacy. Like, the only benefit I see coming from that is like the Switch 2 version of Hogwarts Legacy might be better optimized than the PC version, which would be a win overall. But like, for all intents and purposes, they're very similar in performance specs. The Steam Deck also has the benefit of only having to push to an 800p screen versus a 1080p screen. So if there are more console exclusives that launch on Switch 2 in the future that theoretically will launch at the same time on the Steam Deck, the optimization work has already been figured out for a handheld of similar power to the Steam Deck, and you'll be able to run those games, which is really cool. We've seen some developers kind of making Steam Deck graphic presets over time, like Cyberpunk 2077 and The Last of Us Part 2 are recent examples of games that ended up adding Steam Deck graphic presets. Sniper Elite Resistance also has one. I've found that you can actually get better performance out of higher settings than the Steam Deck presets you usually get, but I feel like one other benefit that we'll get from the Switch 2 is that if they go through the work to make sure these big games are optimized for the Switch 2 because they want to take advantage of that huge user base that the Switch 2 has, it wouldn't be that hard to just kind of dial in those settings and make a preset in a game for the Steam Deck, and it would only take a few seconds because you're just cloning over the actual settings that the Switch 2 is running the game at. So while every other site out there seems to be pitting the Switch 2 against the Steam Deck, I saw an article on The Verge that was like calling it a Steam Deck killer or something like that. It's dumb because they really do seem to be working hand in hand in some really interesting ways. And the coolest thing about that is the companies don't have to talk to each other. It's not like Nintendo and Valve have to like shake hands and say, all right, we'll both make sure our consoles are supported. By game developers supporting one console, they inadvertently help the other. And one huge edge the Steam Deck has is that games that launch exclusively on Switch, if they're third party, also launch at the same time on PC. So no matter which console you're on, things are looking good. And I'm happy. But yeah, that brings me to the fourth news topic here, which is a game you might want to check out on your Steam Deck if you're interested in Fire Emblem. So I have a weird history with Fire Emblem. I absolutely loved Fire Emblem Awakening, and then every game after that lost everything I loved about Fire Emblem Awakening. I loved that it was just 36 levels with cutscenes in between. They went crazy with the sequel where it was like Birthright and 2 other games that came out. Then of course we got 3 Houses. Everyone loved it. I don't like it. I don't need Persona elements in a Fire Emblem game. I just want the combat and cutscenes in between. Then we got Engage, which was fine, like the Colgate edition. So I went on Reddit and I was looking for games that are kind of similar to Fire Emblem Awakening, and people were recommending Dark Deity. And then I was playing Hunt Showdown with my friend Ben, who works at Indie.io, who are the publishers of Dark Deity, and he was like, yeah, Dark Deity 2 just came out and I can give you a key for it and it should run pretty well on Steam Deck. The game's $24.99, which is pretty cheap, and I'm going to be real with you guys, it just feels like Fire Emblem Awakening. It's exactly what I wanted. The art style honestly is even similar to Fire Emblem Awakening. The characters are very reminiscent of the characters from that game. It has the classic rock, paper, scissors combat. It even does the zoom in thing where it puts the characters side by side with each other and then they battle when you take your turn. But it also has some cool quality of life stuff that lets you customize the hell out of your game, and it asks you before you start a new game. So it'll be like, do you want turn limits to make it harder? Do you want to play on easy mode, normal mode, deity mode, or there's like a even harder mode? It lets you pick between linear leveling and random leveling, so you can fine tune this game to be as hard, as easy, or as like simple to get into as you actually want. And the best part is it runs at a locked 90 hertz on the Steam Deck, and because it's basically a 16-bit pixelated graphic game, I don't think it's going to suck battery life all that much. My one big gripe with it so far, if I'm being real, is that the story doesn't really do anything for me, and there is a ton of talking. Like even in the first level, there's like an extended conversation and it's like anime speak where it's over emoted, and that doesn't really do anything for me. I kind of just skipped through that, and then I got into the battle and everything was just a blast. The first battle I did was fighting like wolves and boars, and I thought it was interesting that even though the objective was to escape, someone like me who just likes killing was able to just fly around the map and murder everything on the screen, and the game didn't punish me for it. It's weird to say that it's nostalgic for me because I feel like Fire Emblem Awakening just came out, and I'm not even going to do the math on how old that game is because I don't want to know. I remember playing it at my first job out of college on my 3DS, and that is one massive bummer. So if you're looking for an indie game to kind of scratch that Fire Emblem itch, I can't recommend Dark Deity 2 enough. $24.99 is a pretty cheap price. If you want to wait for a spring sale or something, I'm sure it'll get a little discount, but it just came out, so I feel like it's going to take a little bit to see a deep discount. Obviously, I'm biased because my friend Ben works at the publisher who put it out, but like, I'm having fun with it. I'm probably going to beat it. I think that's a good endorsement. But yeah, guys, that's all I've got for you in this week's Steam Deck news update. I've got some cool ones coming up that aren't news related, so I hope you enjoy them. I'm working on one right now to take advantage of the Steam Deck dock. I'm going to battle with the dock that I've talked so much shit about over the past couple of years. It's gotten some firmware updates. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try and use it like a Nintendo Switch. So look forward to that video. Subscribe if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.